This is For Keeps, a podcast about collections and connections. I'm David Peterkowski. This is the story of a collector whose unbridled enthusiasm for what he collects has never been in jeopardy. It's a passion for collecting that's all about the chase. And since much of what he's collected over the years has come to him without charge through his work, you might even say the price is right. If you're anything like I am, hearing this music, the classic theme to the game show The Price is Right, gives you a jolt of excitement. Game shows, after all, have been an exciting staple of television for decades, fueled by a winning combination of drama, knowledge, and, of course, the possibility of cash and prizes. And maybe even
a new car!
You may love game shows, but you probably don't love them as much as Bob Boden. Bob's an Emmy-nominated television producer, writer, historian, and consultant based in Los Angeles, and his lifelong passion for game shows has led to a long career in the genre. He's played a key role at numerous networks and studios, including all four of America's big TV networks, Hollywood studios including Paramount, Warner Brothers, Disney, and Sony, cable TV's The Game Show Network, and the independent production companies Fremantle and Lionsgate. His resume includes stints on some of the most popular game shows of all time, including Jeopardy, The Price is Right, Family Feud, Match Game, and Pyramid. These days, he's the executive producer of the syndicated game show Funny You Should Ask. In addition to amassing some big-time credits in the game show world, Bob has also developed into quite the game show historian. Throughout his 40 or so years in the business, he's made it a habit to collect props and other items from the shows he's worked on, from podiums used on The Price is Right to the distinctive microphone used on the Match Game by its longtime host, Gene Rayburn. He's got question cards and other set pieces from a wide range of shows, and his massive collection of tickets to game show tapings, given out to members of the live studio audiences, got him featured on national television back when he was in college. More on that later. These days, Bob's focus has shifted from collecting pieces of game show history to sharing the stories behind the genre's development. To do that, he and fellow game show veteran Howard Blumenthal are teaming up with the Strong National Museum of Play, based in Rochester, New York, to create the National Archives of Game Show History. Scripts, set designs, props, production plans, and a lot more will form the heart of the new archives. And Bob plans to donate much of his own 1,000-plus item collection to the museum, which plans to feature archived pieces in in-house displays and traveling exhibits. So for Bob's collection, the Strong Museum should provide the ultimate showcase. Some of Bob's earliest memories involve game shows, including one show he got to see taped live at a very young age.
The first game show I attended was at the age of 6, and it was a show called Password, which was on for many years and is about to come back in its, I think, 5th incarnation. And it was taping at the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York. I grew up in New York. I had been to various places and collected some tickets to TV shows at that point, and I noticed that the minimum age to attend a game show was 6, so I told my mom when I turned 6, I really want to go see Password, and so as soon as I turned 6, I called in that favor.
Uh-huh. So you'd already collected tickets at that point?
I had a few. At that point, my mindset wasn't collecting to collect. It was collecting to attend a show, so I probably had half a dozen tickets. Now I've got thousands, because now I'm a collector.
That fateful taping of Password broadened Bob's burgeoning interest in game shows, and it seems to have also shaped much of Bob's childhood.
In first grade, I would walk to school and lunch was from 12 to 1, and I would walk home for lunch, which was unusual. Most of the kids stayed at school, but I walked home for lunch to watch Jeopardy and had my bologna sandwich, and then I walked back to school at about 12:45. So I watched most of Jeopardy and whatever show came on after that. So that was a favorite, Jeopardy. I liked Password. I liked Match Game, the original Match Game that was on in the 60s. A little later on, I watched Newlywed Game and Dating Game. Moving into the 70s, I was a big fan of The Pyramid Show, which started as the $10,000 pyramid and is now up to $100,000. And the 70s were really the heyday of daytime game shows. So there were as many as 17 or 18 on during the day on broadcast networks. And I pretty much knew all of them. Loved The Price is Right from when it came back in 72. The Joker's Wild, Gambit, Hollywood Squares, the new Match Game, the 70s version. Pretty much everything. There wasn't a game show that I didn't like.
And it sounds like your parents were on board with your love of game shows from an early age.
Yeah, I think my parents found it to be curious, but better I get into game shows than I get into drugs, I suppose. So from a parental standpoint, it was a pretty safe hobby. Perhaps a bit obsessive. I mean, in the summer when all the other kids went away to camp, I didn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to sit in my pajamas and watch game shows all day long. I don't think that pleased them all that much. I was a good kid. I was a really, really good student. And I think as long as I brought home good grades, they didn't care if my passion was game shows.
Bob's good grades and his even greater love of game shows brought him to Los Angeles for college, where he attended UCLA. And the tapings of a lot more game shows when he wasn't in class.
In the 70s, the game show business sort of started to migrate from New York to LA. And I realized that if I wanted to work in that business, I was probably better off in LA. So I packed up and went on a plane at the age of 18. Didn't know a soul in California, but I had a suitcase and a dream.
And what did you study at UCLA?
I was a theater arts major. Not so much because I wanted to be a performer, but it was the easiest major I could find and allowed me a lot of free time where I could work during the day in whatever capacity I could get my entree into the business.
That entree into the business was helped along by a very well-known entertainer who happened to be the featured speaker at a TV taping Bob attended for a program called America Alive.
It was a 1-hour live interview of Lucille Ball with UCLA theater students. So I signed up to be in the audience and I practiced my question and they called on me. I stood up, I asked my question, and Lucy engaged me in a conversation that led to what do I want to do in the business? And my answer was anything I can get. And she got annoyed at that.
You want to direct it or act in it?
Well, anything I can get.
Well, for starters, you better learn how to do something and not just say anything I can get, because they got a lot of sweeping up to do. You know, they give you a broom, and they say, well, it's show business.
So I got my first lecture on national television, live national television from Lucille Ball about career preparation. And then the gentleman who was doing her cue cards that day and who actually invented the cue card, Barney McNulty, came up to me and asked for my phone number. I didn't know why. And he wrote it on a cue card and walked away. And I didn't quite understand that. So I tracked him down backstage and I said, what's going on? He said, I really liked your question and I've got some work for you. Are you available tomorrow to work at Television City? And that's how my career started.
That's a great story. And you worked with the godfather of cue cards.
I did. I got to know him and be friends with him, and he was a truly inspiring man. I'm so lucky to have been in his orbit.
I like that he wrote your phone number down on a cue card.
I sure did.
But it was shortly before Bob's move to California that he began collecting game show-related items. Things got underway for him back in his hometown of New York City.
It started in high school when, if you went to the various ticket offices of the broadcast networks, they all had tickets either on a desk that you could pick up or you could ask for them and they would give you whatever you wanted, as many as you wanted. I liked them. They were colorful. They felt like a souvenir of the business that I had already decided I wanted to work in since I was 6. So I collected a few hundred tickets in New York, most of them for the Pyramid Show, because it taped pretty much all year round and tickets were plentiful. Many shows from NBC, they had tickets available. So that became a passion.
And you didn't necessarily use the tickets. It was more about having a souvenir.
I used some of them, but I guess I figured at an early age that throwing things out wasn't fun or didn't really identify me, so I kept them. And I still have hundreds of the tickets that I gathered when I was in high school. And then when I came out to L.A., tickets were much more plentiful. And I would regularly go to all the ticket offices in L.A. And there were quite a few more places to get tickets and many, many more shows to get them for. So I was a regular and, give me 4 of these and 6 of those and 10 of those. And then it really took on a collector's obsession. When I was in college, in my dorm room, I plastered the wall of my dorm room with tickets, hundreds and hundreds of them going from the middle of the room all the way up to the ceiling. So one of the shows I did cue cards for was Real People, which was one of the first reality shows in the late 70s, early 80s. I spoke with one of the producers one day and I said, why don't you do a story on me? Because I'm a game show fanatic and a college student. They decided to do a feature on me. They came to my dorm room and videotaped me and my ticket collection, and they did a bit with me hosting the home game of Jeopardy because I did that regularly when I was in college. Real People aired that piece on my 22nd birthday. It was a great moment for me. I was very proud of it.
This is where you live? This is your wallpaper?
My room, yeah. These are my TV tickets.
How many tickets are up there?
Well, I got 900 up on the walls, and I've got 8,500 more in a box.
And your roommate was cool with all this?
My roommate was featured in the story, so he was very cool with it. He got to be interviewed. I mean, for every disruption that I might have caused in the dorm, I think I caused a lot more fun and entertainment. So in general, people, if they didn't like me, they put up with me.
Eventually, Bob landed a job at CBS, working in daytime television. And that's where his game show collection expanded from tickets to bigger items from sets.
And one of the shows I was working closely with was The Price is Right. At that point, it had only been on the air about 12 years. Now it's celebrating its 50th year. And the very first game they ever played on this version of The Price is Right was called Any Number. There were 9 squares on a board, and the contestants had to call out digits from 0 through 9, hoping that the digits they called would populate the price of a car, which at that time was only 4 digits. And 3 digits would be in the price of a medium prize, and 3 digits would be in the price of a piggy bank, which was not in dollars, but in dollars and cents. So about 10 years into the run, they decided to replace the set piece of that game with a newer, more modern-looking piece. So they were going to trash that original set piece. And I was working with them, and I said, hey, can I bring that up to my office instead of it being destroyed? And they said, well, we don't care, sure. So they wheeled it up to my office at CBS at TV City one day. And then when I left the network in 88, I decided to take it with me, and nobody cared. As time went on, there were other set pieces that The Price is Right retired. They gave me the original 2 showcase podiums that they used on the show when they replaced those, and various graphics from some of their games when they retired their games or they decided to redo their graphics. I would come down and put them in my car and drive them home.
Bob moved around the game show world over the years, collecting and preserving pieces from the shows he worked on and loved.
And I didn't want them to be thrown away. So I would get a deck of huge playing cards from Card Sharks when I worked on that. A lot of question cards from shows that I worked on. When I wound up working for production companies, they normally had some supplies in their office, and I would help myself to, some Family Feud question cards or videotapes of pilots and things that I was interested in seeing. So it just kind of took off. And as my career travels went in various directions, I would take a piece here and take a piece there and a graphic here and a graphic there and a sign here and a sign there. And lo and behold, I've got hundreds and hundreds, probably well over 1,000 individual pieces from different shows, many of which I worked on and many of which were given to me from people who knew that I loved to collect this stuff.
So let's talk about some of the highlights of your collection. What sort of stands out among all the items you have?
Some of the things I'm most proud of, other than the pieces that I've already mentioned, are Gene Rayburn's microphone from the 70s Match Game. And yeah, it's just a microphone, but it was a very iconic piece because as Match Game progressed from 73, when it came back on the air, until it went off, Gene became identified with this very long, skinny microphone that had been used before. It wasn't unique to him, but many hosts held it up very close to their mouth, so they would hold it about chest high. But it turns out that this microphone extended by another foot, so you could hold it down near your tummy, and it would still extend up high enough to be used as a microphone, to have the tip of it near your mouth. And so Gene became identified with this long, skinny microphone. And one day I borrowed it for a presentation I was making with Game Show Network. And I guess I just forgot to give it back.
And no one missed it.
Oh, they did. They did. They asked me for it, and I said, I'll look for it. I'll find it. I'll send it to you. And I just, years went by.
And then there are some items that Bob acquired from a TV legend who served as the longtime host of the Pyramid programs.
I was a huge fan and got to become a very close friend of Dick Clark's over the years. I wound up working for Dick in the late 90s, early 2000s, and he had a very special place for me in his heart because he knew that when I was in high school attending tapings of Pyramid that he hosted, that I would run down the street to get his autograph and tell him what a fan I was. And so many years later, I'm working for him. His nickname for me in the office was the Stalker, because he remembered my chasing him down the street. So we developed a very, very close bond. He just really, really cared about me and my career. And I think he got a kick out of my passion and my commitment to this world. So when he passed away, two of his kids came to me at his memorial service and said, Dad put something away and asked us to save it for you. And it was the jacket that he was given on Pyramid. It says $25,000 Pyramid, and on the front is embroidered his name, Dick. Typically, shows of that era would give the staff a satin jacket with the logo on the back and their names embroidered on the front as a standard kind of a holiday gift. And so after his passing, I had lunch with his daughter, Cindy, who was still a dear friend of mine. And she pulled it out of a bag and said, "This is what Dad saved for you." It meant an awful lot to me.
Another rare item that Dick Clark gave to Bob dates back to an early incarnation of the show, the $20,000 Pyramid, from when it was taped in New York.
They put together some joke categories that they used on the last show and occasionally through the run to just have some fun with impossible categories. If you're familiar with the show, they'll do a category that one contestant has to give a list of items that fit into that category to their partner. So if it's things that are yellow, you would say a banana, a lemon, a New York taxi, a minion. So the idea here was to come up with categories that were completely impossible. And one that they had was things that taste like lima beans. And so he had that card framed, and it was hanging in his office in Burbank when I was working there. So every time I had a meeting in his office, I would go stand next to the sign and stare at it. And every time he would say, "You can't have that. That's mine." And that became a running joke. Whenever I went into his office, I would walk next to the sign so I could stare at it before I did my corporate business with Dick. So he sold off a lot of his items for charity in the early 2000s, and he didn't sell that piece. Instead, he saved it for me and autographed it. So he was a very special man to me. Not only professionally, he gifted me my first executive producer credit of a primetime network show that I had never dreamt that would ever happen to me. But then he became a really, really close friend.
As a particularly avid collector, Bob had to contend with an issue that many collectors encounter: where to keep it all.
As I continue to collect more and more pieces from different shows, I was finding a bit of a space problem. So in 1999, I was fortunate enough to get married. And lo and behold, we landed on a house that, for whatever reason, had two garages. One was a standard garage that we would park our cars in, and the other one seemed to be the perfect size to house my mini museum. So we had it transformed into an office and put in shelving units for the videotapes I had collected, which were at that time thousands. And we put up netting to protect whatever was in the shelves from falling out during an earthquake. And the netting turned out to be a perfect way to display signage and letters that I had received from many of the titans of the game show business, Mark Goodson and Dick Clark and Dan Enright and Art Fleming, Don Pardo, Ralph Edwards, Fred Silverman. So I have those all on display, as well as some of the more iconic little props and memories and stuff. So that's how I solved the space problem. But I am starting to bulge out of this space too now.
So, are you surprised how easy it was for you to acquire these pieces of game show history? Maybe they weren't seen as history at the time, but is it sort of a theme that in the game show world, things aren't taken all that seriously, and even long-running shows aren't necessarily archived all that well?
Well, there was a time when sets and memorabilia and props were just thought of as disposable. And we finished taping today's show, so you just throw the question cards in the trash. And we're not using that set piece anymore, so just take hammers to it and destroy it. That has evolved and changed tremendously over the past few decades. And now most shows hardly throw anything away, especially not set pieces and iconic identifiers of those shows. There's also been a pretty significant increase in the activity of the charity market. So if a show is replacing a podium, instead of trashing it or at one time giving it to me, they would sell it for charity. A couple of the items that I bought on eBay, the proceeds of which went to charity. I have one of the letters from the flashing Jeopardy set that was on in the mid-'80s, and they spelled out the letters of Jeopardy, and they put up all those letters on eBay to sell them, and I bought one. I bought the J. So that is pretty much the standard procedure now, is if something's being retired, sometimes it's given to the talent, to the host. Sometimes it is sold for auction for charity. Very rarely is it just handed out like it used to be. So I was at the right place at the right time.
And was it widely known in the game show production community that you'd collected and hung on to so many of these items?
Yeah, people pretty much knew that I was the collector guy. For instance, Game Show Network borrowed the Family Feud set, most of it, from Fremantle, who produces it, because they were replacing the pieces, and GSN said, hey, we run the old Family Feud. Can we have those set pieces to use for promotional messages and use them for a few things? And then they said, you know what? It's taking up a lot of space. We don't want it anymore. So one of the gentlemen who had previously worked for me when I worked at Game Show Network called me. He said, we're about to dump the Family Feud set. Get over here right now. I got one piece that day because it fit in my car, and then I had to borrow a friend's van to pick up the other two pieces, which were much larger. But that was a unique opportunity that I couldn't pass up. Many years later, one of the people who worked at TV City, who had access to some old props and sets, called me and he says, hey, we're throwing away a bunch of slide projectors. Do you need a slide projector for any reason? So I get there and I see all these slide projectors that had in them the original slides from the Press Your Luck board. So I was like, oh my God, this is gold. This is not just a slide projector. It's a slide projector with history from 25 years ago. So I was able to get a couple of those and a bunch of the slides.
And you have items that weren't absconded from sets as well, do you not? I think you have home versions of old game shows, things like that.
Yeah, one of the passions I had as a kid was buying the board game versions of the shows. And in those days, they were plentiful. Every year, Milton Bradley would come out with a new version of Jeopardy, a new version of Password, a new version of Concentration. And I wasn't a hoarder of those. I probably had 2 or 3 of each. But as time went on, I would find more of them at garage sales or on eBay. And I thought, it would be nice to have more versions of those. And then there are hundreds and hundreds of other shows that had board games. Sometimes the board games outlasted the show. There were versions of Password that came out long past when the original version on TV went off the air. So I started to collect that, and I've probably got 200 or 300 of those home versions. Some of them are in great shape. Some of them are not. But yeah, I have those all around me in my office, and I love looking at them.
So getting back to your ticket collection, what can you tell me about the Jeopardy ticket you gave to a certain friend of note?
So in my travels and game shows, I've been lucky enough to meet and become friendly with the 3 guys who are affectionately called the GOATs, greatest of all time, on Jeopardy. The 2 sort of original GOATs were Brad Rutter and Ken Jennings. Brad became a champion when the 5-day champion rule was still in effect, and Ken became a champion after it had been eliminated. So Ken was able to win 74 games and became the all-time record holder for game wins and money wins. And for years and years, there were only 2 of these guys, and then a third one came along named James Holzhauer. And I got to know James because he was a contestant on a show I did called The Chase when it was on Game Show Network. It's back now on the air on ABC in prime time. So I got to know the 3 GOATs. And when they did the Jeopardy GOAT tournament, I was fortunate enough to be in the audience. And I was hoping one day that ABC would invite those 3 guys to be on their new version of The Chase as the Chasers. And lo and behold, they did that. So when they were taping the first season of the show, I invited the 3 guys to my house just to hang out. No agenda, just, me and the GOATs. So in true game show fashion, you have to give your guests a parting gift when they leave, right? So I had a bunch of tickets from the pilot of the current version of Jeopardy with Alex Trebek, God rest his soul. The pilot was done in 1983. There were actually 2 pilots that were done. So I had a ticket from the first pilot that was done. I had several tickets from that taping. And I thought it would be a nice parting gift to give each one of the GOATs a Jeopardy ticket from the pilot. And very soon after that, Ken Jennings was called on to host Jeopardy immediately following the passing of Alex Trebek. And Ken taped his first day of shows as host, and that night sent me a very beautiful email saying, I want you to know that I had the ticket you gave me in my pocket all day today as a good luck charm, and it helped me get through the day. And I just thought that was so special and just so sweet that something I gave him would have that level of meaning and help him. I was just so proud of that. And he's become a real good friend.
That's a great story. And I'm glad you didn't give him a box of Rice-A-Roni instead, of course.
Yeah, I don't think that would have fit in his pocket as well. It would have been odd. They would have said, Ken, what's that? That's in your pocket. Rice? Really? No.
So let's switch gears and talk about the game show archive and exhibition you're helping to establish in upstate New York. How did you get involved with that?
So obviously I have a lot of stuff, and my wife has made it clear that she doesn't want to inherit all this stuff. She wants it to find a more nourishing home. And lo and behold, a good friend of mine and a colleague in the game show world, Howard Blumenthal, who lives in Pennsylvania and is best known for creating and producing a breakthrough show called Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego on PBS. But he goes back to the very earliest days when his father was one of the original producers of Concentration, which came on in the late 50s. Howard has a lot of stuff, too, from that era. And although he's not anywhere near the level of collector that I am, his wife also said, well, what are you going to do with all this stuff? So he approached the people at the Strong Museum in Rochester, New York. The Strong National Museum of Play is what they call it. And the reason it's called that is because they are dedicated to everything related to play. They have the National Toy Hall of Fame. They have the International Video Game Hall of Fame. They have exhibits dedicated to dolls and pinball machines and board games and action figures. And so Howard approached them and they said, we'd love to do game shows. We just don't know anyone in that world. So Howard said, I know a guy who is a collector and a friend, and he connected me with them. And we started a dialogue about possibly finding a home, not only for all my memorabilia, but for the hundreds and hundreds of people who have stuff from game shows that they've worked on or been on, souvenirs and scripts and rundowns and notes and all kinds of material from game shows, questions and stunts and props and things like that. So the museum got very excited about that possibility. So they announced the National Archives of Game Show History earlier this year, and Howard Blumenthal and I are the co-founders.
Bob says the archives will have 3 components in all.
The first is collecting electronic materials, so scripts, set designs, rundowns, notes from producers, from writers, from directors, questions, material that made the game shows. Part 2 is interviews. Howard and I pitched the idea, which they adopted in a heartbeat, of doing video diaries of some of the top professionals in the game show world, many of whom are older and made their contributions decades ago. So we are in the course of producing those interviews right now, and those will live on the Strong Museum website in addition to all of the archival electronic files that they're going to be gathering. And part 3 is a physical exhibit space. I believe starting next year, they're going to raise money to construct an exhibit space that will house the game show archives. And part of it will be a permanent exhibition, and part of it will be a travel exhibition that will go around the country to allow people all over America to enjoy and touch and feel and hold and connect themselves with game show history.
It sounds like everyone's a winner. The museum wins, and game show fans win, and your wife wins. She gets part of her house back.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's something I'm very, very proud of. It's kind of my legacy because I was the one who collected and preserved most of this stuff when much of it was going to the trash. But it's really a legacy of the game show world, and to have a home for the history and allow generations to come to get a look and a feel and a connection to this world is something that is a dream for me.
Need further evidence of Bob's game show obsession? Of course you don't. But it's hard to pass on the parent blessing he delivered at his daughter's bat mitzvah a few years back. I only bring this up because you managed to artfully weave in a few game show references.
Yeah.
Was that something your daughter knew was coming?
Yeah, but I mean, both of my daughters, my older daughter is 30 now, and my younger daughter just turned 18. My daughters knew that whatever I was going to say and do as a tribute to them in any context would have some game show references in them. So when it came time for my daughter's bat mitzvah, I crafted a speech that was, your standard dad bat mitzvah speech, but I wanted to pepper in some references to game shows. And the ending of it, I think, is most appropriate for my feeling about giving advice to young people as they're growing up, starting their careers, starting their lives, becoming independent.
In the game show of Jewish life, today you've made it to the bonus round. But it's not just about cash and merchandise, Rachel. As you proceed on your journey through adulthood to make your dreams come true, always do your best and try to remember these words. Play hard, play smart, and play fair. And if you do, you'll certainly hit the dream jackpot and win the most fabulous grand prize of all, a successful, happy life.
And I live by that. When my current wife and I got married, it was in 1999, and Millionaire had just come on a few months earlier, and I asked our rabbi if at the end of our ceremony, after we exchanged vows, he would ask us if that was our final answer. He got a kick out of that, and before the ceremony, he was in his office, and I just popped my head in, and I heard him going, "Is that your final answer? Is that your final answer? Is that your final answer?" He was trying to come up with the best phrasing of how to say it. And he delivered it perfectly. And of course we said yes. And we're married almost 22 years now.
So one last question for you, and it's a big picture question. Why do you think game shows not only merit a museum archive and an exhibition, but also a place in pop culture? I mean, what is it about them that seems to resonate so profoundly with TV viewers generation after generation?
I think that game shows embody the American dream. Wish fulfillment and being able to win something is so ingrained in our culture and in the way that we grow up, whether it's sports or pageants or competitions in school. So much of our learning and our growing is about playing games and trying to win. And television is such a populist part of our culture that it was natural in the early days of television to focus on games because it was familiar to everybody and they had already existed on radio. And who doesn't want to go on a show and display their knowledge or their talent or their personality and have a chance to walk away with a prize? So I think it crosses all barriers of our society and all types of people and all ages and all ethnicities and genders. And I think that it's a unifier. And in an era where there's so much about life that is dreary and frustrating and scary, game shows offer an excitement that you can't find in any other kind of entertainment. Bells and buzzers and whistles and prizes and a new car. You know, who doesn't want to win $1 million? Who wants to be a millionaire? Everybody. Who doesn't want to be on television and have their name followed by those 3 magic words? Come on down.
And it's funny, I never really thought about game shows quite like that. I always think of the competition aspect, but the idea that it's kind of a unifier is a great realization as well.
I really think so. I think, game shows are an antidote for some of the troubles that our world is facing.
Indeed. Well, Bob, that's everything I've got for you. I want to thank you so much for speaking with me about game show history, your memorabilia collection, and the upcoming museum archive and exhibit. And in the name of all that is Goodson and Dodman, it's been really fun.
Can I just put in a plug for if you want to find out more about the game show archives at the Strong Museum, go to museumofplay.org.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks for playing, David.
Hey, you stole my line. I was going to say that to you.
Oh, well, go ahead. You take it.
But it's a unifier, the game show thing. So we're both playing and we're both winning. Thanks again.
Take care, David.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Bob Boden has come a long way since attending that first taping of Password at age 6. Decades later, his unmatched and carefully curated collection of TV game show memorabilia appears to be heading to a most appropriate place, back into the spotlight and out of his garage. And someday soon, when museum goers are able to peruse the game show archives that Bob is helping to set up, they'll undoubtedly feel as though they've hit the jackpot. For Keeps is a production of me, David Peterkovsky. My thanks to Bob Boden for sharing the story behind his museum-worthy collection of game show memorabilia and the story of the lifelong passion behind it. At forkeepspodcast.com, you'll find photos of Bob and some of the more noteworthy items in his collection. And you'll also find a link to the website for the Strong National Museum of Play, the future home of the National Archives of Game Show History. The show's theme song is by Still Flyin, and the closing theme is by Eric Frisch. Additional music for this episode was provided by Chad Crouch. You can visit the show online at forkeepspodcast.com or follow For Keeps on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at For Keeps Podcast. Thanks for listening to For Keeps. Until next time, keep on keeping on.